It's August 23rd, 2011, and we are here in the home of Martin Levine to do an interview for the Jewish Historical Society. I'm the interviewer, Marion Gans, and the videographer is Lester Charlack.
Hold up the paper. Okay. Go.
Good morning, Marion.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, and I'm just delighted to be here because I know that you have a very interesting personal history in Stamford. Let's begin at the beginning, Marty.
Okay.
Tell us about your family. I think that your parents were born in the United States, and your grandparents were also born in the United States?
No, well, some of them were.
Yes.
One of them was. My parents were both born in the United States. My mother's parents were one from Louisville and one from London. My father's parents and grandparents came directly to Stamford from what they described as Minsk Gubernia, which is the Russian term for the Minsk province after Russia took over what is now Belarus.
Mm-hmm.
It was very near Latvia, very near Lithuania,
Mm-hmm.
near Riga. So somewhere in that region, and borders were flexible,
Yes.
so somewhere in that region where they came from. They originally came, there was a family, Chernomolyansky, and with several sisters. And the first one married a Polish, and that was the first person who came in 1905. Apparently came directly to Stamford. I don't know why they picked Stamford. But he came to Stamford, and a year later, everybody else came. So that was, again, with the sisters, it was Schlafer family, Levine family, Polis, Liebman, and the one, Chernomolyansky, the one son, who changed his name to Millions, which is the center portion of Chernomolyansky.
Oh my.
Chernomolyansky is quite a mouthful, so no wonder he changed his name.
Yes.
And they all came to Stamford.
And the Levine family, are any
So
of the
my-
other families still in this area?
Not really. No, it's just I'm practically the only one left. There's one, Bobby Schlafer, who is one of the grandchildren of the original immigrants who lives somewhere in this area. I don't really see him very much, although I grew up right next door to him, ironic.
Uh-huh.
But everybody else moved someplace else. The original family was very large, and at one time there were just dozens and dozens of family members in Stamford and in the area.
And what was your father's business here in Stamford?
My father was an accountant,
Uh-huh.
a private accountant.
And did your mom work?
My mother, most of the time did not work, but she did work at the Stamford bookstore for some time, and she managed the bookstore. She started out just working there as a salesperson, and then became the manager when the owner moved to California.
Uh-huh. And you have two brothers, I believe.
Right. Yeah, Alan, who currently lives in California, and is in the film industry, and David, who lives on the West Bank and has lived there for many, many years.
Yes. David, I recall, designs or makes jewelry.
Yes, David worked at Bicultural, and he was a teacher and an administrator,
Yes.
part-time administrator there. And he had a degree in education. He went to Israel to be a poor educator. And It was an interesting story because when he went, he was very strong Zionist feelings, and the time he went was when there was a lot of settlement in the West Bank area, and he, with a group, became one of the first. There were two original illegal settlements that violated the Labor Party's rules on settlements, and they formed one on their own, and they started to bring in trailers to live in. That required doing a lot of digging, and as they dug the foundations for the trailers, they found some old coins. David had a hobby. His hobby was making jewelry, and he did it mostly with shaping gold and silver. But he had an idea. If he could take these ancient coins that they were digging up and turn them into jewelry, that there might be a market for that. And because soon after they settled there, the Labor government was replaced by Begin's government, the Likud government, there was a change in attitude, and that became a big area for tourists to stop by. And when tourists stopped by, David would talk to them and then bring them into his little trailer and show them his jewelry, and they would buy it. And so it started a business. That became his business, and shortly he was much more polished and making much nicer jewelry and selling it in some of the top line jewelry stores in the tourist areas, in the airports, and Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And today he is an expert on ancient coins of all types, and he is buying ancient coins for distribution and sale all over the world.
That's a very, very interesting change of life from Stanford.
From being a poor educator, he made a very, very nice living doing that.
Let's go back a step to your grandfather who moved to Louisville. Tell us about that part of the family.
It's my mother's family. My great-great-grandparents came to Louisville as relative. They were married, and they were young, in their 20s. They moved to Louisville around 1848 from Germany. I have recently learned that there was a tremendous amount of emigration from Germany around that time, around 1848, 1849, because of political changes in Germany and economic situations. Had nothing to do with their being Jewish. People of all religions were leaving Germany and coming to the United States, hoping to start a new German community in the United States. Indeed, whole communities left Germany and came here. So he was, my grandfather was born in Louisville. Actually, his mother was born in Louisville as well. And
from the same German community, probably.
From the same German community. Their name was Mendel. And they came from Darmstadt and from Baden. That's basically very western Germany, close to the French line. And that area went back and forth. Depending on when it was, it might have been either French or German, but I think it was German at that time.
How did your parents meet? One from Louisville and the other
one from Stanford. My mother actually, well, the grandfather from Louisville moved to New York and met my grandmother, who had immigrated when she was 16 from Britain. She was born in London, was very British in speech and in connections. She thought the world of the crown. And she would tell me a story of when on Queen Victoria's 70, it was her golden jubilee. I think she was 75, and she paraded through the streets, and she and her sister went to watch, and she saw Queen Victoria in a carriage in the streets of London. It's very exciting. Later on, we had many years later, her mother, who lived to be 99, passed away, and there was an unveiling, and after the unveiling we went to somebody's house, and my grandmother and her sister sang music hall tunes from
My
the Boer
goodness.
War. It was
Oh, my.
amazing. It was amazing.
What experiences for you to have had with the elders in that family. How do you feel you were influenced by them from two different cultures, actually?
Let's talk a bit first about my father's side, because that's
Yes.
directly the Stanford end of it.
Okay.
So that family came in 1906, and they settled in the part of Stanford where most of the Jewish community, not all, some of the Jewish community was on the west side, but most were in what is now basically covered by the mall.
Oh.
Grey Rock Place, Pacific Street,
Yes.
and Chapel Street, Brook Street. That's mostly covered by the mall now. In fact, just this summer we were having dinner at a restaurant at the mall, the Capitol Grill, with some good friends, and subject came up, I guess, of my background, my ancestry, and I said, actually, my father might have been born right where we're sitting now, because
How
people were born at
interesting.
home.
Yes.
And my father was born in 1911, delivered by Dr. Jacob Nemoitin, as many Jewish children were at the time
Oh,
at
yes.
home. So
He
his
has become a legend in
yes,
the Jewish
absolutely,
community.
absolutely right. So his grandparents, my father's grandparents, came here, and they settled in that area. I happen to have a picture of the family, and this is, I'm not sure how well you can get this. This is my great-grandfather, who was a very religious man, and you can see he's in full religious dress, and his wife, their sons, they had 7 sons, and my father, wearing, at that time what was common, was not pants yet, he was too young, he was like 2 here, wearing a dress. And this is my grandparents, right here.
That is a treasure to have a photo
Yes.
like that.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And this, interestingly, is a book that belonged to my great-grandfather. It is the first volume of the Shulchan Aruch, and he signed it all over the place. He was. What's interesting is his name. He is in English. His name was Philip Feivel. It was his Hebrew name, and my middle name is for him. Paul is Feivel. Here he's written his name in English. He had a stamp with his address, 144 Pacific Street, and Pacific Street was the center of the Jewish community. Here he's written his name in Russian,
Ah,
and here in Hebrew.
my.
So he was fluent already when he came here in Russian and in Hebrew, and likely in Yiddish, although I don't have the proof of that here. But almost everybody spoke Yiddish as their first language. And he became comfortable with English as well. So I don't know how well, but certainly he had to get on here. And so this was a wonderful souvenir. He also wrote in the back, and this is some writing in Hebrew script over here on the front piece, and then on the back is writing in Russian script.
Oh my goodness. What kind of work did he do when he came here?
He had a few things, I guess. First of all, he was, let's see, he had a store at some point. I don't know when he opened that store. Probably after he'd been here for a while, he opened the store. A news store and a variety store. That was one thing. And he also was a shochet for the community.
Ah,
That was another thing he did, and was connected with the Godet Shalom, which was the center of the Orthodox community at the time. And he also owned a cow. He owned a cow that he kept in the South End, in a barn. And when my father was a boy, if he didn't have school on a particular day, he would walk the cow up Bedford Street, which was a dirt road at the time,
yes.
to what is now Ridgeway Shopping Center. because Ridgeway at that time was owned by somebody who leased it out for grazing.
Oh,
So my father would walk the cow up there, it would graze during the day, and then my father would walk it back late in the day to the barn.
my goodness. Not many people have a story like that to tell.
Right. So it's interesting, and Ridgeway actually plays a role in our lives because after or during World War II, our family moved into a complex which was then rental apartments, Colonial Gardens,
Yes.
which is between Ridgeway and the hotel right there, and we lived there while Ridgeway was being begun. So I have good memories of they had dug out the back parking lot, which is lower than the top level. The Bedford Street side was much lower, and while they had excavated it and it snowed, it was great sledding. Go down that hill.
I was told also that before Ridgeway was developed, that it used to be the location for the circus.
The circus came to town at Ridgeway, and then while Ridgeway was being developed, the circus came to town across the street on what is now IHOP and Bassett's property.
Oh my.
So that was very, very enjoyable because when the circus came to town, the elephants, it came by railroad.
Yes.
And they would march the elephants up Summer Street. My father would wake us up to go out to Summer Street to look at the elephants walking by. And they would end up right across the street from where we lived. It was very exciting.
That is something. Your family represent, I think, two different facets of culture within the Jewish community. Your father having come from and being part of a very Orthodox community, and your mother from a very different.
Yes. My father's family was very traditional and typical Eastern European immigrants of their time, and had very traditional views about everything. And my mother's family, well, her father was an artist, and I have some of his artwork here, and her mother was a hat maker. And so they were different. Her mother smoked. This is in the 1920s.
Your mother's mother, your grandmother.
Right, my grandmother from England. She smoked. She wore pants. That was kind of shocking.
Yes.
And they really, although they were both Jewish by genealogy, there was no Jewishness in their home. They were very much liberated agnostics, and so that was a big gap to bridge for my father and mother.
Yes. Yes. And
My mother also, my father's home, there was a lot of Yiddish spoken, and my mother spoke no Yiddish at all. Actually, my mother grew up in the San Fernando Valley. She was a valley girl.
a valley
And
girl.
moved to New York when she was in high school.
I see. How do you feel that affected you and your brothers to have such different perspectives and such different backgrounds of your parents? Was it effective at all, or did your mother simply adapt to your father's way of life?
Mostly my mother adapted to my father's way of life. She really had a very confusing, itinerant childhood. They moved from place to place. Her father did some commercial artwork, and he looked for work in different places. So they had traveled around. He was sometimes very rich and sometimes not rich at all.
Not so rich.
So they lived in California, for instance, and they didn't have much money. At the time, you could rent an apartment with, say, a 2-year lease, but you would get the first 3 months or 2 months free. So they would move into an apartment, and then, just when the 3 months were up, in the middle of the night, they would move out. And she didn't like that, and she didn't like that they moved a lot. They lived in many places. They lived all over in California. They also lived in the South, in Charlotte, and we had a job there for a while, and different places. He also wrote, so he ran a magazine there, the Police Gazette.
Oh my.
And he had been a sports writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer before he came to New York. So he had a very varied background.
Yes.
And and it was very different than my father's family, which was very traditional.
It must have been really culture shock for the Levine family to have this secular Jewish young woman become part of their family.
It was very difficult for my grandmother, who certainly didn't approve at all, and let my mother know she didn't approve.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult.
My.
And there was a huge difference. My mother's family were artists. Her father was an artist. Her brother was a recognized artist at the time, and it was hard to find artists models. So they were comfortable with my mother being a model for her brother and her father for art. And as in their house, in their apartment in New York, was an art piece with my mother semi-naked. It was a back view with a drape, but it was something my father was very uncomfortable with because he was very conservative about it, very prudish actually. So they would describe how he would come into the house and he would walk by that picture like this. He couldn't stand it even was there. It just, he was very uncomfortable with that. And for my mother's family, this is about art. And,
Yes.
it was very comfortable, no problem with it at all.
Right. So you were raised actually religious-wise at Congregation Agudath Shalom.
Yes, my father had become bar mitzvah at Agudath Shalom, and so was I.
Mm-hmm.
I did as well. We were kosher. We were kosher in the house, and we varied out of the house. If there was a kosher restaurant available, my father would prefer it. So we went on vacations, and we always looked for a kosher restaurant to go to. But if there wasn't one available, he was flexible.
Oh, okay.
He was more flexible with what we ate than with what he ate.
Aha, yes, yes. Tell us a little about your education aside from your religious education. The schools you went to in Stanford and beyond.
I started at Franklin School,
Hmm.
and that was kindergarten to third grade, started during the war. And then we moved from the Ridgeway area, we moved to Glenbrook into a house, and I went to Stark School. We were half a block from Stark School. It was very convenient. Finished at Stark School and went to Dolan.
For middle school.
For middle school, well, junior high school they called it at the time.
Then, yeah.
And then from Dolan to Stanford High, which was at that time the only high school in Stanford.
Yes. And then after Stanford High?
After Stanford High, I went to University of Connecticut. I lasted there for about a year and a half, and did not apply myself well to my studies, would be a nice way to put it.
Okay.
And my parents and I determined that I would be better off living at home, and I transferred to NYU, and I commuted to NYU, and did much better.
Mm-hmm. What did you major in?
I majored in business and political science.
Hmm.
So I wanted something practical. My heart was in the political science, but my future, I decided, lay in having some kind of business background.
Business background. Yeah. You had to be practical.
Right.
Yes. And what was your first job?
My first job, I worked a lot. Let's see. My first job actually was setting up bowling pins at the Jewish Center when I was 13 years old.
Well.
That was my first job.
Really? And you were paid for that?
10 cents a frame. 15 cents for the 10 pins, 10 cents for duck pins, which it mostly was. I worked through high school, worked after school, and worked weekends and during the summer. I had taken one summer, I took a secretarial course in typing, and was a really good typist, 100 words a minute kind of range, and loved it. I had terrible handwriting, which is why I wanted to do that. And I went to Short's secretarial school, which was in back of the Stanford Theater.
Oh my, yes.
And I was the only one there under the age of 22 or so.
Were there other males there, other men?
There was one fellow who was in his senior year at Yale, but other than that, it was almost all women. And that was good because it helped me get jobs. I had a talent and ability. I had a job as an actuary for an actuarial firm. Not as an actuary, but working for an actuarial firm, computing numbers, working on calculators. And
is this while you were in school?
While I was in school. That was Burdick School burned down when I was in my senior year. And all the students were transferred to Stanford High. We went on double sessions. So I was out of school by 1 o'clock.
Yes.
And I had all afternoon to work, so I had a nice job that took care of me. And then after, I worked while I went to NYU, and then after that, when I was finishing NYU, I finished my last semester at night and went to and worked at Pitney Bowes as on the accounting training program.
And post NYU?
Went to law school for a year, didn't really like it, and went back to Pitney Bowes. And I had finished my training program, and they tested me and put me into what was a new field then, systems analysis and programming. And I took on, and that became most of my career was in management information systems.
Management information systems. And so you were with Pitney Bowes for a while, for a few years?
I was at Pitney Bowes for maybe 2 years, and that was enough. Pitney Bowes put me in a position where I was their lead person on new equipment, and when I finished that, the rest of Pitney Bowes had to catch up with me, and I wanted to move on to even newer technology. So I looked for something that was newer technology, and that was in New York. And then I worked in several positions in New York where, with more up-to-date technology. Pitney Bowes was really a bit behind the times.
Amazing. And they were one of the major employers in Stanford for many years. Yes. Tell me how you met your wife. How'd you meet Andrea? Because Andrea was not from Stanford, was she?
Right. Andrea was from Queens, and we met at Grossinger's at a singles weekend.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So they had a system where you would sit at different tables with different people instead of having to sit at one table for the whole weekend. And Saturday night we ended up at the same table, and I was immediately attracted to her. And didn't take long for us to get together.
That's a very nice story. When were you married?
October '66.
And
So this is our 45th anniversary year.
oh, that's wonderful. Lovely. And you have 3 children?
2 children.
2 children, sorry.
Robert, our son, is currently living in Germany, and he has a daughter who is going to be a year on September 5th, and we are going to go to Germany to celebrate that.
Yes, I recall that you went to Germany last year, shortly after
Shortly after she was born.
she was born, right?
That's right. That's right. So they live in Berlin, and we're going to be staying with her mother, Kirsten's mother, in Koblenz, which is on the Rhine.
Oh.
I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, that should
And
be lovely.
from there, after a week there, we're going to take the train to Paris for a week.
And your daughter?
My daughter Laura lives in Providence. She is a psychiatrist and works for the Veterans Administration. And she has 2 lovely children. Max is 5.5, and Zoe is 3.5. And Max is starting school this year.
Oh, very nice. And so you commute occasionally up to Providence?
We not occasionally. We go to Providence almost every week.
Oh,
And
my.
we stay overnight, and it's delightful. We've really gotten to build a very close relationship with our grandchildren.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Very nice.
Yes. Now, Marty, I know, in addition to your professional work, that you have been very, very involved, very committed to community work, and you've served on several boards in Stamford. Please tell us about that.
Okay. I was involved when I was in college at NYU. I became involved very much in the civil rights movement. And I was a freedom writer and sitter-inner and things like that, and sat in the lunch counters and caused in the South and on the way down South. And that got me very much involved in politics. And
You had said that political science
political
was your
science,
love.
I started out with an interest in political science
Yes.
anyway. And so I came back to Stanford after school was finished, and I looked for involvement and got involved in Democratic Party politics and was on the Democratic City Committee. And then an opportunity came up for an appointment, and I was appointed to the zoning board, which I knew very little about.
It was a learning experience.
Right,
Yeah.
and after a year, I became chairman of the board, and
You learned fast.
and then pretty much for the next 9 years, I was chairman of the zoning board and made some major changes in Stanford as a result of that. It was a very exciting time.
What
and
years were those? Do you recall?
1975 to 1985.
Mm.
And it was a time of tremendous growth in Stanford. Stanford was seeing a lot of commercial development, some of it really terrific, and some of it in areas of town where it was inappropriate. People were living in a nice single-family or two-family home and surrounded by similar, and all of a sudden an 8-story building went up next to them, and with a huge parking lot, and it was just inappropriate. So we made some changes.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the other changes? Was that around the time that the corporate presence was coming into Stanford?
Yes, yes. And the corporate presence was welcome downtown. And
Yes.
the corporate presence was welcome in some other areas. But Stanford's infrastructure was not adequate to handle a tremendous amount of corporate development and traffic in every part of town. Some parts of town it just didn't work. But people were looking to make some quick money, and they would take a piece of property, and suddenly there would be a large building. For instance, Bull's Head, which was something of a retail area for a large part of Stanford.
Yes.
There was a problem because people started to build huge commercial office buildings there. And our concern was that eventually those commercial office buildings would take over all the areas that were dominated by retail properties. And you have to have retail to serve the community. So we changed some of that. We didn't make it residential necessarily, but in most cases we changed it to a commercial zone that permitted lower development.
I see. So you really, during a 10-year period, you made a mark. You placed a very definite stamp on the way Stanford was being shaped.
Yes, there are people who are very unhappy about that to this day.
Well,
but yes, but there were also people who appreciated that they felt some protection from a zoning board that was concerned about maintaining the character of Stanford's residential areas.
Mm-hmm. And after the zoning board, you remained active politically and within the community.
I did, although I took some time off from actively being involved on a board. I was for a couple of years on the Board of Assessment Appeals, which reviews people's assessments for tax purposes. And then somebody asked me to become involved in education, and I ran for the Board of Education, and that was in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
I had just basically semi-retired or retired, and this was an opportunity I felt to spend time on something important, and so I did that, and I was elected 3 times, and for 9 years, and that was very gratifying also.
Mm-hmm. To go back a step, the major part of your professional life, you were then commuting to New York.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yet you managed to find time to become so involved at such a critical period in the growth of Stanford.
At some cost to my career, but I was never unhappy about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the train,
Yes.
and the train gave me time to do a lot of preparation for meetings. It was reading time. It was undisturbed reading time, which was great. And then I would spend time on the weekends looking at properties and things. But I didn't put in extra hours in my job that would have given me more advancement. So interestingly, from the time I left the zoning board, I got a promotion, a change of job, and about a 60% increase in my salary in 2 years. Because suddenly I was focusing more on my work and putting in a little extra time.
Mm-hmm. You were raised at Agudath Shalom, and you are now a member of Chavrat Eitz Chaim.
Right.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. I love the Agudath Shalom in many ways as I was growing up, and I have very good memories of going to Shabbos services, and after services I would walk across the street to my Uncle Mitchell's variety store, Mitchell's, which was right next to the Central Fire Department, and then I would chat with him a while, maybe have a malted, and then walk around downtown. Downtown was a delightful place to be. As a young person, my parents were very comfortable with me being down there when I was 11, 12 years old by myself. There were 4 5 and dimes, and I loved to walk through the 5 and dimes. They had book sales, and for almost nothing you could go through all these books and pick out nice books that were interesting. Many of them used textbooks.
This is in like the 1950s?
This is in the 1950s, the early 1950s, right.
Mm-hmm.
And then was Speller Teller. Speller Teller was a radio program on WSDC, which used to be a local radio station. Now it's sort of a national station. They pick up feeds from other areas. But Speller Teller was a program where students, children of different ages could go on, and you would be selected or not selected, but if you were selected, you would go before, on the radio, before an announcer who would ask you to spell words, and there were words for 5 cents and for 10 cents and for 25 cents and maybe a 50-cent word if you were lucky, and you would, if you spelled it correctly, you would get that money. And so that was a livelihood. And I enjoyed that.
Uh-huh. Were you able to appear more than once?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You could go back
chance
again
I
and
could.
again?
Yes, you could. So I was as regular as I could be. I was very disappointed if I wasn't selected that week. They would select several from the people who showed up. But that was fun. But Agudath Shalom was good. When we had a family, I really wanted to sit with my wife and my family. I did not. The one thing that I did not like was sitting separately. So as long as my parents were there, then we stayed at Agudath Shalom. Once my parents moved to Florida, we decided to look for other options.
Mm-hmm. And when did you join the Chavra?
About 1975,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Yeah, 74, 75. It was just after our daughter Laura was born.
So it was then a very young organization.
Yes, it was a few years old.
Mm-hmm.
We had actually, was more than a few years old, but we had been attending for a couple of years on and off until we left Aguda Shalom. I couldn't leave Aguda Shalom as long as my father was there,
Yes.
because I sat next to him. That was a big thing. When I was young, we had a whole row. There was a big Levine Schlafer family. We had
Yes.
a whole row P usually. And, it was very nice.
Well, I know that your religious background, your Hebrew background, has meant a great deal to the Chavurah, because you have performed as Gabbai, I believe.
Right, on occasion.
On many occasions.
In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. My Hebrew is not that fluent at all, but I
But
can
you
struggle
read well.
through it. I can struggle through it.
You usually find the place very
Right.
quickly.
Yeah.
I know also that you and Andrea are dancers. Does this go back to your meeting at Grossinger's, or was this an interest that you developed?
This goes back to before that. If people from Stanford will remember Phil Jones.
Oh, yes.
Phil Jones had a dancing school. He was a World War II vet who came back and opened a dancing school, and that was a rite of passage for at the junior high school level. And we would go, and all the boys would line up on one side, the girls would line up on the other side, and we learned a lot of things. We learned to dance. We learned basic steps in every dance. But besides that, I learned how to ask a girl to dance. I learned how to hold a girl to dance. I learned how to return her to her seat when the dance was over. I learned how to make conversation with a girl. This was hard for me because I had two brothers. There were no girls in the family that I could do that with easily. And I became comfortable with that. It was very, very helpful for my social development. My first date, my first girlfriend, as it were, was from somebody I met at Phil Jones dancing.
In the dancing class.
So I enjoyed dancing. And then when we met, we could both dance. We were both able to dance, and were comfortable with simple steps. Dancing, social dancing, is not really ballroom dancing. Ballroom dancing takes it up a notch because you have a line of dance around the dance floor. The first time we went to the Terrace Club, which was a wonderful place in Stanford, originally called Ladden's Terrace, and where I went to a prom way back when. But the first time we went there, we started to dance on the floor, and everybody's pushing by us. And I'm thinking, where are all these people going? It's just a foxtrot. Foxtrot, you dance in a little box, right? Well, foxtrot, you don't dance in a box. It's called a foxtrot because you move. And so we started taking lessons, and it's a whole new type of dance. Now we do almost all the dances, a lot more complicated than just a box step.
Yes, of course. And you attend a dance group, I believe.
We go to dances in Greenwich usually, or in New Rochelle. We used to go at the Terrace Club, but they unfortunately tore it down. So there's no place left in Stanford to go. But there's a wonderful dance that's held twice a month in Greenwich, and there's one we go to in New Rochelle, and there's some we've gone to on occasion in Westchester. And all very nice. And the people
Yes.
you meet are very nice, and it's a very good opportunity for a couple to have a night out and to be together without the phone ringing, without TV
Yes.
competing, with just the two of us. So we enjoy it.
You really have had such a colorful, interesting, and productive life, both civically and within the Jewish community. You have contributed so much over the years that you really are a pillar of both communities. Before we end this conversation, is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't asked you?
Yeah, well, I want to talk a bit about how I got involved in the community, because that came from my parents. My parents were both very much involved in the community. My father was very involved with B'nai B'rith, and he he was the founding president of the Synagogue Men's Club at Good Shalom. And he wrote the B'nai B'rith Times. He edited for B'nai B'rith for many, many years. And my mother was a president of B'nai B'rith Women, and was an officer with the Jewish Center, a Jewish Community Center. So they were both very much involved in the Jewish community. I took it the next step and became more involved in the secular community, but what I learned from them was the importance of community service.
Yes. I met Virginia when we were newcomers as a newlywed to Stanford through Women's Division of UJA. She was active then. And so that really, they were role models for you. Certainly. One other thing. You grew up in Stanford during the late 1940s into the 1950s. Were you aware of anti-Semitism in school or out of school in any of the activities you participated in?
Almost none. My father told me that when he was young, and the Italian immigrant community and the Jewish immigrant community both lived downtown.
They were in that Pacific Street area.
Right, and he went to Rice School, and he said there were issues. There were the Italian children would often pick on the Jewish kids and call them names and things. And my father fortunately had a lot of uncles, so he was protected. I didn't really have any of that. There were one or two, three maybe isolated instances of ignorant people who would say something stupid, but in terms of general, I didn't feel any anti-Semitism. Didn't have that feeling. There was separation. The Jewish kids tended to stick to our own quite a bit socially. I was involved in AZA and an officer there, and so we hung around the Jewish Center. There were dances and things for the Jewish kids. We talked to everybody in school. We were all fully integrated into school, but there was pressure from parents on both sides to keep the socializing separate. So going out with somebody who wasn't Jewish was kind of edgy. People did it, but it was edgy. In fact, I was just talking to a friend I ran into at West Beach, and he asked me, did I ever go to any of the reunions from Stanford High? And I said, yeah, it just happens. I went to the 50th. And he said, well, he went to the 5th reunion. And he said, there were 8 Jewish couples, and we all sat at the same table. And I never went back, because all those people I can see any place. I don't have to go to reunions. And that was an example of, we weren't fully socially integrated, although in school we were academically integrated. I had friends who were Jewish and friends who weren't Jewish, but I didn't have dates that weren't Jewish. That changed when I got to college.
Okay. But you married a nice Jewish girl.
I married a wonderful Jewish girl. Right.
Yes.
Right. My parents were pleasantly surprised. I think my parents were happy she was white at the time. That was a whole other issue.
Yes. Well, Marty, this has just been delightful for me, and you've imparted so much information that reflects on the culture of what Stanford was like through all of your years of living here, both the Jewish culture and the secular culture. And on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society, I want to thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about it.